It's dangerous out there. It's very dangerous out there. It's dangerous for anybody to go to sea in ships.
The guys screaming and knowing that we were actually sending them to their deaths.
Soos ek sê, as 'n mens net sy liggaam kon gekry het, 'n ordentlike begrafnis kon gehou het.
And meanwhile, these guys could hear people calling out from inside.
And that's the day when your life just crashed.
In 1982 het die Suid-Afrikaanse vloot, gebaseer hier in Simonstad, die duurste, mees gevorderde wapentuig in die Suid-Afrikaanse weermag gehad. Hulle was bekend as presidentsfrigatte en hulle was die trots van die vloot. In die middel van Februarie 1982 het die SAS President Pretorius en die SAS President Kruger hier vanuit Simonstad vertrek op 'n roetineoefening.
Routine, ja, maar tog gevaarlik. Chris Bennett, 'n afgetrede admiraal wat vir meer as 30 jaar self op see was, as vlootattaché in Londen gedien het en verskeie boeke oor die Suid-Afrikaanse vloot geskryf het, verduidelik dat daar meer as net die fregatte aan die oefening deelgeneem het.
In the surface fleet, the two frigates involved with the President Kruger and the President Pretorius, both what we term as Type 12 frigates. Those two frigates were 2,200 tons in that sort of order.
The frigate largely in our case here is a vessel. It is the smallest vessel which is able to operate autonomously. We had 3 President-class frigates, the President Kruger, the President Steyn and the President Pretorius. They were British-built frigates and they were strong, capable frigates.
The Tafelberg, on the other hand, was a merchant vessel, a tanker. She was built in Denmark. She was purchased by South Africa. She was then converted in Durban with all the rigs and the hoses to be able to refuel ships at sea. And then she became the support vessel for the Navy. She's the replenishment at sea vessel. Tafelberg was a very much bigger vessel than either of the two frigates. She was a big vessel, in the order of 19,000 tons.
Maar die feite en die syfers gee mens net 'n idee van die afmetings en massa van hierdie betrokke skepe. Wat dit 'n mens nie gee nie, is 'n sin vir die manne wat lewe gegee het aan hierdie koue staal oorlogskepe. Manne soos Lawrence Batchelor en Isak Jooste, wat doodgewone dienspligtiges was. En ouens soos Andrew White, wat deel was van die staande mag van die land.
Toe kry ek die keuse, ons doen toe 'n opleiding by die hospitaal. Toe kry ek die keuse of ons gaan operasioneel medies die grens toe gaan en dan of jy kan kies Simonstad medies op die skepe. Ek sê toe, ek weet toe klaar wat my besluit is, ek gaan Simonstad toe.
Yeah, it was the lesser of the evils. It was like, I knew that if I was going to go to do national service, Army was third choice, Air Force would have been second choice, and Navy was first choice.
I was a seaman on board and I was busy with a helicopter handling course because I wanted to become a TAS rate, which is torpedo anti-submarine, and I was waiting for that course to actually start.
Normally conscripts didn't get sent to ships. It was just lucky. I think as national service goes, it was a fun thing to do.
Soos in enige weermag van enige aard was die manne nie bewus van waarmee hulle presies besig was nie. Daardie kennis was slegs hulle bevelvoerders beskore. Nie dat die oefening waarmee hulle besig was enigstens besonders was nie. Was eintlik alles maar net roetine.
The President Kruger, President Pretorius and Tafelberg were exercising with a submarine which was carrying the submarine officer commanding course, known as SPOC for short. And what was happening is each day one of those officers on the SMOC would be given command of the submarine and would carry out attacks on the surface ship, and in fact attempting to carry out attacks on Tafelberg, and the two frigates were screening Tafelberg. In order to keep the submarine in the area where everyone was operating, the surface fleet had to virtually reverse course every 2 hours. 2 o'clock that morning, the 18th, they turned 150 degrees towards the north, and then at 4 o'clock they were turning 150 degrees towards the south.
I didn't used to pay that much attention. I used to just go with the flow. You know, the ship sailing, I just do my stuff on the ship, and I didn't really know what we were doing, or I knew we were going to be out for a few days, and I knew we weren't going far.
The incident took place, what one would call it, southwest of Cape Point. It was 85, 90 nautical miles away from the peninsula out into the deep sea. It was in about, I think it's 3,000 odd meters of water, so it was quite deep water. It was fairly rough. It was not it wasn't bad weather. There was a wind, and there was a bit of a sea running, but nothing really untoward. It was nothing that would sort of have to make you stop doing the exercise. Ship being screened, which was Tafelberg, would remain on her course, on a steady course, until such time as the 2 frigates had reversed their positions and had taken up station astern of her in their sectors. Then the Tafelberg would turn, and the whole force would in fact turn, and they would go on going south. The instruction for this, it was to happen at 4 o'clock in the morning. The principal warfare officer in the ops room was the man who sort of coordinated and controlled the exercise, and at the appropriate time, it's around about 10 to 4, he gave the instruction for the reorientation of the screen. There were 2 options, more so for President Kruger than for President Pretorius. President Kruger could turn outwards and go well clear and down to her new position, or she could turn inwards. Now, in terms of the in operational situation and a non-exercise situation, the ship would probably definitely have turned inwards, because if you turned inwards, and one can see it on the diagram, she goes through the water that's close to the ship being screened, and she's then searching that water to make sure there are no submarines there. She turns outward, in this case it would have been to port. She's a long way clear, and there's a big swath of water next to the Tafelberg which would have remained unswept. The officer of the watch was a young sub-lieutenant who was uncertified. He was standing his first night watch. He hadn't really been sort of vetted and cleared by his captain to stand a watch. He'd just been put there, so it comes out in the evidence, the only way he knew he was considered competent to stand a watch was seeing his name on the list. The officer of the watch is the guy who's visual. He has the full and total responsibility for the ship at that stage. The only person who can countermand him is the captain of the ship. He had a second officer of the watch on the bridge with him, who was his senior in rank, in the rank, both sub-lieutenants, but he was the senior sub-lieutenant of the 2, who'd also didn't have a bridge watchkeeping certificate, was therefore uncertificated, but had just come back from a 6-month deployment to the Chilean Navy, where he'd spent a long time at sea. It also then comes down to the principal warfare officer who's running the ops room. He was a qualified principal warfare officer, which means that he had a bridge watchkeeping certificate. He was qualified to stand a watch on the bridge and also in the ops room. He gave the instruction to President Kruger to turn to starboard, in other words, inwards. The officers of the watch, then put on 10 degrees of rudder.
In meeste militêre oefeninge is dit standaard vir 'n skip wat omdraai om 15 grade roerhoek te gebruik. Met die hoeveelheid roer is dit moontlik vir 'n fregat om binne net 628 meter van sy oorspronklike koers af verby te vaar. Maar met 'n roerhoek van net 10 grade lyk die prentjie heeltemal anders. 'n Fregat wat van die klein roerhoek gebruik maak, sal 982 meter van sy oorspronklike koers af verbyvaar, 'n verskil van meer as 350 meter. Waarom die manne op die brug besluit het om 10 grade van roer pleks van 15 toe te pas, bly 'n raaisel. Maar die feit bly staan dat daardie besluit 'n kritieke fout was. Met die besluit om 10 grade op die roer toe te pas, het die brugbemanning die President Kruger verdoem.
As the ship was now turning, the ops room became aware that only 10 degrees of rudder was being used, and an altercation broke out between the ops room and the bridge. The ops room say you should be using 15 degrees, and the officer of the watch sort of saying no, he's using 10 degrees. There's no record of exactly what was said. We only know there was a bit of an altercation. PWO in the ops room is not entitled to tell the officer on the bridge how to turn the ship. He tells him to turn, that's right. He says, you are to turn to starboard to a new course. But the officer of the watch is the guy who's visual. He has the full and total responsibility for the ship.
Die rede hoekom die waghebbende offisier verantwoordelikheid vir die hele skip het, is omdat hy teoreties die beste uitsig het. Hy kan gevare sien kom en kan gegrond daarop sekere besluite neem. Iets wat die manne onder in die romp nie kan doen nie. In die donker of in slegte weer speel radar uiteraard 'n sleutelrol. Van selfs op die brug, in die donker, is die uitsig byna niks.
Tafelberg was now lost in the sea clutter. So the ops room couldn't see exactly where Tafelberg was. Instead of using the high definition radar, that was US, it wasn't working, so they had to use the search radar on the plot, which is it has sea clutter, which blocks everything that was going out to 1,800 yards, which meant that as soon as the ships got closer than 1,800 yards, the ops room didn't know what was happening. The executive officer of President Kruger was in the ops room because he was preparing, he was reading the captain's night orders and odds and ends like that, preparing to go on the bridge to take over the morning watch. He heard this altercation, realized there was something wrong, and ran up to the bridge. But of course by then he tried to take over and maneuver the ship out of Tafelberg, because as soon as he got onto the bridge he could see that Tafelberg was right on top of him. The Tafelberg was in the dilemma that in the terms of the rule, if you're looking at international rules of the road, Tafelberg should have given way, but in terms of exercise or maneuvering instructions within a force, he was told to go on a straight course at a steady speed. And he's not entitled to alter course or alter speed, because if he changes something that the other ships are unaware of, he can cause an accident. So he's got to proceed.
Met die Tafelberg op 'n vasgestelde koers en die president Kruger wat nie skerp genoeg gedraai het nie, was daar net een moontlike uiteinde. Net voor 4:00 op die oggend van 18 Februarie het die Tafelberg teen die president Kruger gebots.
There was an almighty crash. It was like loud bang, and it was as if the ship had driven into, if you were driving a car and you crashed into a wall, that was the feeling, that the ship just stopped dead like this.
I got woken up with a incredible jarring and a huge bump, which I initially thought was a grounding, that the ship actually had hit some land and that we'd stop.
I was asleep and I was woken up with the bang, and you know when you're just sort of kind of waking up, it's a distant sort of bang, even though it was blooming loud. But if I'd been awake, I would have obviously heard it much more. It would have been much louder. I think that's probably why I thought we'd run aground, and there wasn't actually, you know, as I said, at that point I didn't even suspect a collision.
Toe word ek wakker met die slag, soos iemand wat met die deur oopskop en die deure bars net so oop.
I was thrown out of my bunk. I found myself on the deck in my underpants, and I remember standing up and I slipped again. And already then the oil in the water must have been, you know, coming in.
So everybody else had been sleeping in their hammocks. So everybody was out of their hammocks in a flash. It was like everybody knew what to do. They got dressed. Everybody got dressed, and we all cleared out of this, you know, went up the stairs into the main alleyway, and then and would have gone to our separate muster points.
The alarm sounded in action stations, and basically I think a voice came over the intercom saying this is not a drill, that it was serious, and that we should all get ready to abandon ship.
Because from our mess you could go out the stern part of the ship through an alleyway, and I just remember that had been sort of quite compressed. The lockers, the clothing lockers were all over the show. I remember glass.
Die water was nog hier by ons voete, op en af gewas. En daar was losplanke en seker 'n paar spykers getrap en daai hout wat daar uitgeskeer het en so aan.
We then sort of more or less got ourselves organised to get out of the mess. You know, single file up the ladder sort of thing. It was quite difficult because of the oil and the water coming in and so on.
What struck me as pretty serious was when there was no lighting. When the lighting went down, then I thought, ooh, this could be something big. And it didn't take long before the ship started listing. And when the ship started listing, then that was also like, that's not a good sign.
En die ver opgaan in die skip aan die linkerkant was die junior uit se badkamer gewees. Nou daar het ek ingekyk, soos reg in die see.
It was a series of bathrooms, and those bathrooms were destroyed because people who walked past afterwards saw that the ship's side was open there and the bathrooms were destroyed. And underneath there was a mess in which 16 people were sleeping.
Op die brug was die bevelvoerders nog nie seker presies watter skade in die botsing aangerig is nie. Maar hulle het dadelik besef hulle moet alles in hulle vermoë doen om die skip en sy bemanning te red. Die bevel is gegee om alle waterdigte luike toe te skroef. 'n Bevel wat deur die manne onder in die romp uitgevoer moes word.
I was above the hatch, and it was a very tight area, and it had the ladder, and then it was an incredibly confined space. And we could hear guys screaming and asking for help.
Myself and a pal were just about to batten down the hatch, leading out of mess 12. Mess 11, yeah. And we heard the screaming downstairs coming from probably mess 12. I pulled a curtain off the warrants mess, and my friend Andre, he held one end of the curtain, and I sort of like ventured down the stairway as far as I could go. But by then the water was mostly coming up, and it seemed as if somebody was trapped under something, because as the ship rolled either to port or starboard, I can't remember, he would scream, and then as the ship rolled the other way, the screaming stopped. So I'm assuming, you know, the guy was trapped sort of half in and out of the water.
One of the divers already was down there, and he pulled out this petty officer, and I sort of went down a little bit down the ladder, and I helped him up, and he was screaming in pain, so I tried to pick him up, but he didn't want me to touch him around his legs, because again I found out much later that all his legs had been lacerated from the metal of the ship that had, you know, basically got torn open.
Then the order came to to close the hatch. We struggled a lot because of the rolling of the ship and the water coming back up the hatch.
Yeah, the water was coming in thick and fast, and there was a bit of discussion as to whether we should try and rescue them, but an order was given to close the hatch, and we basically closed the hatch, and you know, to the screams of these 14 guys that were under the deck.
Sover dan later vasgestel kon word, het slegs 2 van die 16 manne wat in Menasie 12 geslaap het, die ongeluk oorleef. Een is deur die skeur in die romp die water ingesleer, terwyl die ander een Peer Rood was, wat deur Lawrence se vriend Dion Boonsaier uit die puin van Menasie 12 gered is.
So I took him to the emergency medical room, which was the officers' mess. They turned it into a makeshift medical room.
The man that Dion had helped out, I think he came out, I'm not sure, I think he came out naked with just a sheet, and Dion took him off to the medic, and the medic, they treated him as much as they could. Now he was suffering from lacerations, I'm not sure where, but lacerations from the torn metal at the point of impact.
We managed to walk past the wardroom, which was pretty much up forward. And I looked in and I saw the doctor and a man. He was injured. He seemed to be cut up pretty badly. He was lying on the deck. And so I went in, helped move the furniture to the side, and did what you can. And eventually we decided to get him out of the ship. So we took him out the hatch. I think that hatch was just above the 4-5. So it was the doctor, myself. I'm not sure if there were other guys helping, I can't remember. Anyway, we got him out onto the upper deck.
Well, I went back and caught up with Lawrence and said to him that I think I was pretty much in a state of shock by this stage, because sort of what had occurred, and it was almost like, it was in a dreamlike state. But I just said to him it was pretty serious and that we should stick together, because I figured if we'd stuck together we could make it out alive.
Dion came to me, and at a point Dion said to me, like, this is serious, we got to stick together. Now I hadn't seen what Dion had seen. I hadn't heard people like going to their deaths.
An officer came up, I think it was Lieutenant Visser, and he asked us to look after the PO that I'd actually helped pull out of the mess, of the PO's mess. The only other one of 2 survivors out of that mess.
There was a Lieutenant Visser who had come walking along, and the same guy that Dion had taken to the medic was now being led by Lieutenant Visser, and Lieutenant Visser said to Dion and I, look after this man. And so it was Dion, myself, and this injured man who'd come out of the mess, who were moving together.
Voorkant van die skip, daar so staan. En ons het tussen die, daar's 'n hatch tussen die dink is die bouvoor, né? Die kanon voor en die brug. Dis daar 'n hatch wat jy kan uitkom daarso. Ja. Ons het daar uitgeklim en toe soort van opgekruip teen die dek, teen die hoogste kant, en toe van die brug se kant af. Het ons nou weer terugbeweeg na die water se kant toe.
We had to climb out of the forward hatch. Now the stairs were kind of attached on a kind of a hinge. So there's a hatch about like a meter by a meter, and the stairs were hanging from this hinge, and the stairs were hanging so that you actually had to kind of push the stairs away, because the way the stairs were hanging, they were closing the gap to climb through out of that hatch. And then we got onto the forward deck.
And then I lost track of Pierre Root. He was the guy who was in the wardroom with the doc. And we found ourselves on the upper deck then, but by then the ship was listing quite badly.
We'd climbed up onto the we'd climbed up onto the bridge. We were on the bridge, and I looked at this man, and I saw that he was wearing only a sheet, and I was wearing my life jacket. Now, I'm not sure what went through my head, but I just thought that this man could use this life jacket more than I could. I knew that I was a strong in water, and he was injured and shocked and bewildered, and there was a part of me that was kind of felt quite together with all this.
Skok en verwarring vir party, terwyl ander genadiglik opgehou het. Want op 'n sinkende skip in 'n donkere nag suid van die Kaap van Storms, het jy 'n goeie kop nodig as jy wil oorleef. Veral as die weer lyk soos dit daardie nag gelyk het.
There was this howling wind blowing, and the seas were like huge, like 3, 4, I don't know how many meters swells. They were just massive swells pummeling against the side of the ship.
Die duinings, ek bedoel, man, dis ongelooflik. Jy sien dit net op televisie as hulle vir jou die Noordpool of Suidpool wys daai diep duinings wat jy moet deurgaan.
Although we had to get off the ship on the port side, the port side was the side that the ship had been hit, and the ship was listening to the port. So that was the side to get off the ship, because the other side would have been like a huge height out of the water, and also at a slope like this. So although we needed to get off the ship on the port side, we walked around to the starboard side of the stairs that go up onto the bridge, and we climbed the starboard side of the stairs that go onto the bridge, and there's like a landing or a deck next to the bridge on either side.
Toe ek nou 'n life jacket gekry daarso, en daar het iemand die mense soort van aangedui, okay, gaan soos almal op mekaar spring nou nie.
And it was at this point Lieutenant Visser was with us again. He was on the deck, and he was on this deck next to the bridge, and Lieutenant Visser was sending people off through to the other side and getting off. And Lieutenant Visser's, we were basically we were going to be joining the last life raft around, and Lieutenant Visser said to me, take charge of that life raft. If you stood on the quay in harbour and you looked up at the bridge, you'd be looking at about a 3-story, probably at the height of a 3-story building, or maybe even a 4-story building, and then you still had the difference from the quay to the water. So the bridge is way out of the water. The ship was listing, the ship was full of water and getting close to sinking, and the swells were so large that the swells were lapping up onto the deck at bridge level. So and the swells would either be at bridge level, or they would be 2 or 3 stories down below. It was pretty important to time your step into the water.
It was myself, the captain, the Jimmy, we jumped into the water more or less probably the same time. We just sort of like stepped over the bridge wing, and we were in the water.
Daai gedeelte van die skip was so laag by die water dat jy was vir my soos 'n tree en jy spring in die water en dan is jy weg.
Dion was, I think, on the left-hand side. The injured man was in the middle. I was on the right-hand side, and we had him by the arm. And when the water came up, it was time to go, and he didn't go. So I can remember, I'm sure Dion did the same. We just ripped him with us into the water. We're into the water, and next thing just pulled away from the ship by the water, and then it was a case of swimming out to the life.
And it was still, I think, about 4:30 in the morning at this stage. The water was pretty cold, and I remember having to kick off my jandals because I couldn't swim so well with them on.
Geen mens wat nie daar was, kan eers begin om hom in te dink van hoe dit moes gewees het nie. Eers word jy wakker van 'n enorme slag met
alarms en water en 'n skip wat om jou begin sink. En dan, wanneer jy uiteindelik jou pad tot bo gevind het, moet jy jou begewe in 'n gietswart oseaan waar die stryd om oorlewing voortgesit word.
Jy weet 'n berserkers, jy weet jy gewoon waartoe nou, jy weet jy kry 'n punt. Soos jy mos nou op die land is en jy's daar in die water. Okay, ek gaan na 'n land toe swem, want dis waar ek wil wees. Nou sien ek liggies, dan swem ek, jy weet, ek swem so intoe. Dis nog 'n ou met 'n liggie en 'n baadjie aan. So intoe, okay, daar's 'n klomp ouens met hou mekaar vas. En in die geswemmery het ek na 20 minute, ek beloof vir jou, het ek gesê vir myself, okay, ek gaan nou nie meer swem nie. Ek is moeg van die water wat heeltemal oor my kop breek en 'n sluk water en is olie en ek weet nie wat alles sien. Toe dink ek, okay, gaan nou maar ons gaan maar saam af.
The injured man, Dion, and I swam out with him to the raft, and we made sure he was at the raft with us. And the raft was the reason it was the last raft left there was because it was uninflated or semi-inflated. So it was probably upside down and semi-inflated, and so there was no getting into or onto that raft. There was just a case of hanging onto the sides.
We got to a life raft. It was pretty much upside down. There was only only the pontoon at the base of, if it was in the upright position, only the base was inflated. The rest was all either damaged or deflated, or the CO2 cylinder didn't work properly or something.
Behind these huge swells, now and then, there were two little life jacket lights shining, and they were kind of coming closer and making their way towards us. Now the all life rafts have a drogue, a line with a kind of a underwater parachute attached to it, so that life rafts don't just get blown away to miles away from wherever an incident has happened.
Batchy wasn't wearing a life raft, swimming out, pulling in guys, 200-300 meters away, bringing them up to the line, to the drone line, and getting them to haul themselves towards us. I think he pulled in about 3 or 4 people, and he was pretty heroic at that time.
En toe swem ek en toevallig nou een van daai toue vas. En toe ek myself ingetrek en die reddingsboot van ons was nie ten volle opgeblaas, onderste bo en dit half opgeblaas. So jy kan hom vashou daaraan, maar is nie net sommer reis te skryf, dit's fantasties.
It was the captain, myself, and 1 or 2 others on the life raft, but I remember there was a guy lying across the bottom of the life raft. And as I was holding on to the life raft, because I was in the water, there wasn't place for all of us, I felt the warmness on my arm, and this guy was actually bringing up sort of an oily sort of substance onto my arm. I remember that pretty clearly.
The captain holding onto my wrist so tightly that I had to actually hit him to try and get him to loosen his grip, because he was actually hurting me. I think he was just in a state of shock.
Man, jy kry krampe. Dan swem jy so 'n bietjie en los jy en later nie meer geweet hoe om vas te hou nie, want jy sien nou daar is 'n skip en daar is 'n skip.
It was pretty nerve-wracking, and after about 2 hours I sort of started freaking out a bit, that I thought, if they don't pick us up soon, I was going to start getting seriously cold.
Whenever a ship came past, swinging its searchlights, it was, yeah, here we are. Obviously, they couldn't really hear us or anything.
Everybody's in the water, and we're low in the water. It's not like we're a nice little bubble on top of the water. We're low in the water, and there's searchlights playing across the water from the 2 ships.
I remember seeing the President Kruger rising up and holding upright for a couple of seconds, or probably was a bit longer than that, but it felt pretty quick, and then it just disappeared beneath the water.
In 'n bizarre sameloop van omstandighede was twee broers daardie nag saam op die see. Een van hulle, Roy McMaster, het diens gedoen op die President Kruger. Aan boord van die ander fregat, die President Pretorius, wat besig was om bemanningslede van die gedoemde skip te red, was sy broer Gerald.
Die 18e, 3:30 die oggend, toe word ons almal wakker gemaak op die President Pretorius in Emergency State 1. Die President Kruger is besig om te sink. Daar was 'n ongeluk met die Tafelberg en die President Kruger. Toe het ek dadelik aan my broer gedink wat daar is en waar hy is. Weet, en dit het my, ek het verskriklik, ek was bekommerd geweest. Ek het net gehoop dat hy okay was. Dit was verskriklik onstuimig, die see was rof, jy kon skaars mense sien. Ons het maar met searchlights het ons gesoek.
Every time a searchlight came across us, we'd be in the trough and you'd see the searchlight playing across the peaks of the waves on either side of us.
You'd see the searchlight come and you'd sort of dip underwater and you'd pop up again and the ship would be heading off in a different direction.
All the searchlights and signal lanterns and so forth shining out and saying, when you pick up a man, you see a man in the water, keep it on him so that he knows he's been seen.
The President Pretorius picked us up. We're a little life raft bobbing around in the sea and they had to maneuver this huge ship, probably just downweather from the raft so that the raft could just get blown into the side of the ship.
Jy is oomblik is hier onder net. Volgende oggend kan jy amper daarbo vasvang en self uitklim. En dan die volgende oggend is hy weer weg onder jou voete.
The raft was doing this up and down next to the ship. This violent bouncing up and down next to the ship.
I was pretty tired, hanging on as I got up, and I remember so clearly somebody grabbed me by my hair and somebody grabbed me by my underpants and they literally threw me onto the President Pretorius deck.
The swell coming right up against the side and I grabbed onto the net and then the swell subsided and I ended up having a couple of guys hanging off me and I remember screaming at them to say, hold on to the net, not me, because I was about to let go. I remember holding on with all my strength.
We all sort of one by one got out and grabbed this rope net and hauled ourselves the last little bit. If you got the timing right, then you got out at the top and hauled ourselves the last little bit over the top onto the ship.
En toe het ons omtrent seker so 120 mense opgetel op die President Pretorius en op die Tafelberg. Alhoewel hy beskadig was, het hulle net die voorste kant afgeblank, want die hele voorkant van die Tafelberg was amper missing geweest, soos hy deur die President Kruger gegaan het.
Ek het nie geweet nie. Ek in die spieël kyk, die eerste keer sien ek my gesig en alles is pikswart.
It was just such a relief to be out of the water. Then it was off to the shower. I remember washing myself in Gamlin, which is like a bilge cleaner sort of thing, just to get this oil and off me.
And then we were given overalls to get dressed into and then given some food to eat in the mess.
Goeienaand. 13 bemanningslede van die fregat SAS President Kruger, wat vanoggend na 'n botsing teen die vloot se hervullingsskip die Tafelberg gesink het, word nog vermis.
Vir die manne wat gered is, was die ergste verby. Veilig, met hulle voete op 'n dek wat nie lys nie, is hulle die warm storte in, het hulle geëet en ontspan. Maar vir Gerald was daar die groeiende bekommernis oor sy broer, terwyl onderoffisier G.W. de Villiers se vrou Vanessa se nagmerrie net begin het.
We will continue to look for them and continue to search for them as long as we possibly can, in the hope that they have survived.
I remember his last words to his son was, "That other tooth better be out when I come back." I was busy standing and ironing in my lounge, and I had the radio on, and I can still remember I was ironing his blue shirt, his naval blue shirt, which I used the blues for when they were working on the ships. And then there was a news brief coming over that the SAS President Victoria and Tafelberg has just been in an accident. That's when I froze, and then I just stopped everything, and I went to my room and I woke my sister up and I said, "No, there's been a naval disaster, but I don't believe it's the President Victoria's, I think it's the Kruger."
Ek het nou verwag, hier kom my broer aangeloop, hy is op die Tafelberg of op die President Pretoria waar ek is, maar dit is 'n groot skip.
The difficulty was actually knowing who made it and who didn't, because even though it was, you know, there was the crew that was on the President Pretorius, there was also a number of guys that got picked up by the Tafelberg, so, you know, we didn't know who'd made it.
Dit was vir my 'n skok toe ek aan wal gaan. Toe die bemanning van Tafelberg en die mense wat nou die roukol doen, vir my dadelik kom sê het dat my broer is een van hulle wat weg is. Hulle kan hom nie kry nie.
Everything was chaotic. You didn't want to believe anything, you didn't want to believe that it happened. You were just hoping that they would find them and bring them back.
Daar was 16 manne in een cabin gewees en my broer was een van hulle. En die ergste van alles is, as jy 'n liggaam van 'n persoon kry wat gesterf het, dit is die ergste. Daar was nie 'n liggaam wat my ma kon kry en begrawe het nie. Dit is net op see, koef, body gone, persons disappeared.
That's the day when your life just crashed. You lost all dignity, you couldn't care a damn what happened to you.
As 'n mens alles in ag neem, die weerstoestande, die feit dat dit donker was, die grootte van die skepe, dan is dit 'n wonder dat nie meer mense daai dag gesterf het nie. Die feit dat net 2 bemanningslede verdrink het, dien as 'n bewys van die uitmuntende seevaartkunde wat tydens die reddingspoging toegepas is.
Apart from the 14 who died and those 2 other individuals, everyone was recovered. Everyone was saved. It's quite phenomenal under those conditions, because the ship went down fairly quickly. She went down about 45 minutes, roughly 45 minutes after the collision. She was on her way down.
I think seamanship is something very special in the South African Navy, primarily because the seas here are so big and dangerous. The seas here are wild.
The loss of a frigate in a navy the size of the South African Navy is a major catastrophe.
I think a navy our size, any navy, you lose a ship, it's a big, big thing. But the reality is it's dangerous out there. It's very dangerous out there. It's dangerous for anybody to go to sea in ships. It's more dangerous at night time. It's more dangerous when the visibility is bad. It's more dangerous when you're operating in close company. It's more dangerous when submarines are involved in it. It's the nature of the game.
Alhoewel talle kenners dit eens is dat die kaptein van die President Kruger die meeste blaam vir die ongeluk moes kry, was dit die oorlogsoffisier wat aanvanklik die bevel gegee het om na stuurboord te draai, wat die swaarste deurgeloop het na die ongeluk wat hierdie 2 stukke metaal vir ewig met mekaar verbind het. Ander offisiere wat die beste van 'n slegte saak probeer maak het, se loopbane is ingeperk en meeste van hulle is vroeg weg uit die vloot. Alhoewel net 1 medalje toegestaan is, was daar talle verhale van dapperheid wat na die tyd vertel is.
2 jaar na die ongeluk is 'n enkele honoris crucis medalje vir dapperheid aan seeman Andrew White toegeken. Volgens die vermelding het Andrew nooit sy eie veiligheid eerste gestel nie, maar telke male homself in gevaar gestel om sy medemens te help. Maar Andrew meen self dat daar verskeie ander bemanningslede was wat net soveel as hy 'n medalje moes kry. Op die ou end gaan dit egter nie oor toekennings of vermeldings nie, maar eerder oor die invloed wat die gebeure van daardie donker oggend op die Suid-Afrikaanse vloot en op sy toekoms gehad het.
I think President Kruger had a huge impact on the South African Navy. It got us to look at ourselves and to realize that as a relatively small Navy, we've got to take things exceedingly seriously. And I think that attitude is reflected through today.
This incident was a big event in my life.
So that was a pretty tough thing to cope with and deal with at the time, and still is today actually.
Dit het my meer besef dat jy is vandag hier en môre kan jy weg wees.
Want ons is baie close. En ek mis hom baie, verskriklik. Oh.
It's hard. People can say what they like, but it's something that will live with you forever.
Those who lost their lives in PK, they lost their lives, I believe, for a greater cause. And we've got to believe it that way. We've got to believe it. And I think that, in a way, those who've lost their lives, their legacy lives on in the new South African Navy, which stands back for no other Navy.